The hotel lobby had that quiet hum typical of a late afternoon. Guests came and went, some hurried, some casually strolling to the elevators. The rich, polished marble floors reflected the soft glow from the chandeliers above. Everything about this place screamed luxury, from the plush carpets to the elegant art hanging on the walls. It was one of those spots where you'd expect the finest people, the most refined business meetings, and high society types to pass through the doors. It was a place where people looked important, even when they weren't. Then, the door opened. The man who stepped inside didn't fit in with the surroundings. He had ragged clothes, worn-out shoes, and a large sack slung over his shoulder. His face was weathered, marked by years of struggle. His hair was long and unkempt, his beard thick with neglect. As he crossed the threshold, his boots clacked on the marble floor, a sound that felt too loud for the soft ambience of the hotel. He was out of place. The staff noticed him right away. Whispers passed between the receptionists, and a few guests turned their heads to observe the strange sight. A man like him didn't belong here, not in a place like this. He didn't appear to notice the stares. His eyes were distant, as if lost in a world that only he could see. He moved with purpose, straight to the front desk. His steps were measured, slow, but firm. His posture was oddly confident, as though he had been here before and knew exactly what he was doing. Despite the obvious disarray of his appearance, there was something in the way he carried himself that felt unsettling. Something about him made you think he wasn't as lost as he seemed. "Can I help you?" The receptionist, a young woman named Emily, said with a polite smile. She didn't expect much. He was probably just looking for directions or maybe hoping to ask for some charity. But then, as if to her surprise, the man spoke. "I own this place." The word struck Emily with a force that left her momentarily speechless. She blinked, thinking she hadn't heard him right. The man repeated himself, his voice steady and calm, though his words were utterly nonsensical. "I own this hotel." The laugh escaped before she could stop it. Her colleagues behind her stifled their chuckles, exchanging knowing glances. Maybe he was some sort of eccentric? Perhaps a mentally unstable person who wandered in off the street? Who could take him seriously? "Excuse me?" Emily asked again, trying to maintain the professional tone she was taught to use. "Are you saying you own the hotel?" The man didn't respond right away. Instead, he reached into his sack, pulling out an old, weathered document. It was yellowed with age, its edges frayed as though it had been folded and unfolded too many times. He placed it carefully on the counter. Emily hesitated for a moment, confused. She had no idea what to make of this situation. Why would a homeless man be carrying something like this around? She didn't even know if it was real. "Take a look," the man said. Emily's fingers brushed against the crinkled paper. It felt fragile in her hand, a relic from some forgotten time. She glanced at the document's contents, struggling to make sense of the formal language. But one thing stood out to her almost immediately. The hotel's name was there, right on the top. The building she worked in. The document appeared official, but how could that be? The letterhead looked old, as though it came from decades ago. It didn't make sense. There was no way this man, this homeless stranger, could possibly have anything to do with the luxury hotel. Yet, something about the way he stood there, waiting, looking at her with calm eyes, made her second-guess herself. "Is this a joke?" Emily asked, trying to laugh, but there was no humor in her voice. The man didn't respond. His eyes remained fixed on her, unblinking. His face was unreadable. Emily's hand trembled slightly as she looked at the paper again. The document seemed to hold something more than just the hotel's name. It felt like it was telling a story, one that hadn't been fully understood. She glanced up, trying to catch her colleague's eye, but they all had their heads down, busy with other tasks, as if they were trying to ignore what was happening. "I need you to check it," the man said, his voice firm now, an edge of impatience creeping into it. It's all here. The ownership. The land. Everything. His words hung in the air like a challenge, an assertion that made the air in the room feel heavier. Emily took a deep breath. There was no way she could just dismiss this without checking. I'll have someone look into it, she said, unsure of herself. She turned to one of her colleagues, a man named Greg, who was standing nearby. His face mirrored her confusion, though there was an odd look in his eyes. He didn't laugh, didn't mock. He simply walked over to the desk, and together they looked at the document. Emily had worked here for years. She knew every inch of the place, from the quiet back hallways to the luxurious suites at the top floor. She'd seen all kinds of people come and go, from wealthy business tycoons to foreign tourists, but no one, had ever made such a bold, strange claim. A homeless man, wearing a sack and talking about owning the hotel? It was absurd. But there was something about him that made her wonder. Greg bent over the paper, reading the strange, outdated language. His brow furrowed. I've never seen anything like this before, he muttered, glancing up at Emily. Emily glanced back at the man standing before them, his eyes still unwavering, still filled with that same quiet certainty. He wasn't looking for attention. He wasn't trying to trick them. He was waiting for them to understand something. Something that neither of them had yet grasped. Let me check with the manager, Emily said finally, backing away from the counter. She needed to get someone higher up involved. She needed to figure out if this was some sort of elaborate prank or if there was something more to this story. The man didn't move, didn't speak. He simply stood there, his large sack resting by his feet, waiting. His presence felt heavy, almost oppressive. As Emily walked toward the back office, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. She had no idea what was going on, but she knew she wasn't just dealing with some lost, confused individual. There was something deeper here. Something hidden beneath the surface. It didn't take long for the hotel manager, Mr. Daniels, to arrive. He was a tall man in his late 40s, always impeccably dressed in a tailored suit. The manager's appearance screamed authority, but as he approached the front desk and saw the homeless man standing there, his composure slipped slightly. "What's going on here?" Mr. Daniels asked, his voice tight. His gaze flicked from Emily to the man. "I don't know, sir. He says he owns the hotel." We're just trying to understand," Emily explained. Mr. Daniels stared at the man, his eyes narrowing in disbelief. He was about to dismiss the whole situation with a scoff, but something in the man's gaze stopped him. For the first time, he took a longer look at the document. His mouth went dry. This can't be real," Mr. Daniels muttered, his voice a little shaky. "Who are you?" The man didn't respond right away. Instead, he reached down and grabbed his sack, his hands moving with careful precision. He pulled out another item, a set of old keys, tarnished and worn with use. He held them up, showing them to the manager. "Do you recognize these?" The man asked quietly, his voice almost a whisper. "The keys. The old, rusted keys." Mr. Daniels felt a chill run down his spine as his gaze dropped to the rusted metal. They looked familiar. Too familiar. And in that moment, he understood. The man wasn't lying. But what did that mean for all of them? The chill in the air grew colder as Mr. Daniels took a step back from the counter. He stared at the keys in the homeless man's hand, his mind racing. His eyes flicked back and forth between the man's face and the rusty metal. They were old. Very old. But there was something about them, something that dug at the back of his memory like a splinter he couldn't pull out. "Where did you get those?" Mr. Daniels asked, his voice a little too tight for comfort. The man didn't answer right away. He only held up the keys and gave a slow, deliberate nod. Then he placed them on the counter in front of Mr. Daniels, the sound of the metal scraping against the marble sending an eerie echo through the quiet lobby. It felt like the keys were speaking their own silent language, one that neither Emily nor Greg could decipher, but that the man seemed to understand intimately. Mr. Daniels took a deep breath, his throat dry. These keys, they look familiar. A flicker of something passed through the man's eyes, something like recognition. A slow, almost imperceptible smile curled at the corners of his lips, but it wasn't a pleasant smile. It was more like the smile of someone who had known a great secret for far too long and had been waiting for someone else to uncover it. "Of course they do," the man said, his voice quiet but firm. "These are the keys to the building. To the real building." The words hit like a punch to the gut. Mr. Daniels took a step back, his eyes narrowing. He'd worked here for years. He knew every inch of the place, from the grand lobby to the staff quarters hidden behind the scenes. He knew who owned it. It was a company, an investment group, not some homeless man off the street. The ownership had never been in question. Or so he thought. "Look," Mr. Daniels began, trying to regain control, "I don't know who you are or what you think you know, but you can't just walk in here and claim ownership of this hotel. It doesn't work like that." The man didn't flinch. He didn't seem to care about Mr. Daniels' words. He simply stood there, waiting. He didn't rush. He didn't try to explain. He let the silence hang in the air like an unanswered question. Emily and Greg exchanged uneasy glances. The whole situation felt wrong, unnatural. This wasn't just a matter of some deranged person claiming to be someone they weren't. There was something deeper at play here. Something that none of them could fully understand. "Do you want me to prove it?" the man asked finally, breaking the silence. "Because I can. I will." Mr. Daniels hesitated. His instincts screamed at him to call security, to throw this man out before things escalated further. But something about his calm demeanor, the way he carried himself, made it hard to dismiss him as just another vagrant with delusions of grandeur. This man wasn't just saying things to get attention. He believed every word he was saying. The man leaned forward slightly, his eyes fixed on Mr. Daniels. "The hotel is built on land that wasn't supposed to be sold. The original owner, he sold it to the wrong people. And when he did, he didn't realize what he was giving up." "What are you talking about?" Greg asked, unable to stay silent any longer. His voice shook, but it was clear he couldn't wrap his head around the situation either. "The land? This is a luxury hotel. It's been here for decades." The man nodded slowly. "Yes, it has. But it wasn't always supposed to be here. The land, this building, everything you see here, it was meant for something else. And the people who bought it, they didn't understand what they were really getting. What they were really buying." Mr. Daniels frowned, his mind struggling to keep up with the man's cryptic words. "You're talking nonsense. This hotel has been around for decades. It's one of the most profitable properties in the city. There's no way." "There is a way," the man interrupted, his voice growing more intense. "And I can prove it. The land wasn't for sale. It was never meant to be sold. It was always meant to be kept in the hands of someone who understood what it was." Greg blinked in confusion. "What are you saying? Are you telling us the land is cursed or something?" The homeless man smirked, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was more like a person who had lived through something horrific and knew exactly what was coming next. "Not cursed. But something like that, yes. Something like that." The silence grew thick. Emily stepped forward, her curiosity piqued despite the unease swirling inside her. She had been listening intently, but she still didn't understand. "So what are you saying?" she asked, her voice wavering slightly. "That you're the original owner? That this hotel is yours?" The man nodded, his eyes hardening. Yes. It is mine. Or at least, it was. The land and the building were left to me. But when the transaction was made, when the wrong people took over, it set everything into motion. And now the truth is coming to light. Mr. Daniels' head was spinning. This was insane. How could this be real? He knew the history of the hotel. He had been involved in every legal transaction, every document, every contract. Nothing about what the man was saying made any sense. Do you have any proof of this? Mr. Daniels demanded, his voice shaking with a mix of disbelief and anger. The man said nothing at first. Then, without a word, he reached into his bag again, pulling out a small, old leather-bound book. The cover was faded and cracked with age. It looked like something that had been passed down through generations. The man placed the book on the counter in front of Mr. Daniels, his eyes never leaving the manager's face. This, the man said simply, is the proof. Mr. Daniels' hand hesitated as he reached for the book. It was small, almost delicate, like it might crumble into dust if handled too roughly. The leather was worn from years of use, and the pages inside looked ancient, yellowed with age. He opened it carefully, his fingers trembling as he turned the pages. The first page was handwritten, in elegant cursive. Mr. Daniels read it aloud, though the words seemed strange, almost like a foreign language. To my son, who will carry on the legacy of our family. This land was never meant to be sold. It is to be kept within the family, for generations to come. He stopped, his heart pounding in his chest. He looked up at the man. The words on the page made no sense. There was no way this could be real. This book had to be some kind of fraud. But the man was staring at him now, his face unreadable. He wasn't making this up. He believed it. And in his eyes, there was a depth of pain and loss that Mr. Daniels couldn't ignore. What is this? Mr. Daniels whispered, his voice barely audible. The man's eyes softened. The truth. This hotel, this land, it was always meant to be mine. And now, I've come to take it back. The weight of the leather-bound book in Mr. Daniels' hands felt heavier than he expected. His fingers still trembled as he closed the cover and stared at the worn pages, the handwriting still dancing in his mind. His heart was pounding now, a steady drumbeat of confusion and disbelief. His mind was a whirlwind of questions, but the one that echoed louder than all the rest was the simplest: what was going on here? The homeless man, the one who had just walked into the lobby claiming ownership of the hotel, was now standing there, silent, watching him. His eyes were patient, as though he had been expecting this moment for a long time. Emily and Greg, who had been silent observers until now, seemed frozen in place. They looked at Mr. Daniels, then at the man, their expressions a mixture of skepticism and nervousness. Emily's lips parted as if to say something, but no words came out. Greg was leaning against the counter, still unsure of what to believe. Finally, Mr. Daniels took a deep breath. His instincts screamed at him to dismiss this entire encounter as some elaborate prank. But a deeper, quieter part of him, something he couldn't ignore, began to wonder if there was truth hidden beneath the surface. There was a history to this hotel, a history he knew better than anyone. But what if that history wasn't the whole story? He looked at the man. What are you telling me? His voice had lost its previous edge of anger and confusion, replaced by a strange, cautious curiosity. What exactly are you claiming? The homeless man didn't flinch. Instead, he simply nodded toward the book in Mr. Daniels' hands. It's all there. The legacy. The truth about this place. Mr. Daniels opened the book again, his gaze fixed on the first page as though it might reveal something more. The elegant cursive had begun to make more sense, the words no longer as foreign as before. He read aloud once more, this time with more focus, letting each word sink in. This land was never meant to be sold. It was meant to be preserved, kept for those who understand the value of its history, its significance. My son, you will protect this legacy, and one day, the truth will be revealed. The words seemed to echo in the lobby. Something about them, something about the way they were written, made Mr. Daniels feel like he was standing at the edge of a deep, dark hole that he had been unknowingly staring into for years. The words on the page seemed to be pulling him into a history that he hadn't known existed. Who is this? Mr. Daniels finally asked, his voice tight. Who wrote this? And why should I believe any of this? This is all insane. The homeless man stepped closer, his hands clasped behind his back. There was a calmness about him now, a stillness. That didn't seem to match the chaos of the moment. I can't make you believe it. But I can show you. The story of this hotel, of this land, it's all tied together. The people who owned it before, the ones who took it from my family, they erased the truth. They buried it. Mr. Daniels looked at the book again, then at the man. His mind was racing. What was he saying? Erased the truth? Buried it? This hotel had always been part of the city's skyline, a symbol of luxury and success. It was one of the oldest establishments in the area, a landmark for tourists and locals alike. There was no way something like this could be true. But as he looked at the homeless man, something inside him started to crack. Something deep in his gut told him that he wasn't dealing with a crazy person. This man had been here before. He knew things about the hotel that no one could possibly know. I don't understand, Mr. Daniels said, feeling the weight of the words as he spoke them aloud. Who are you? The homeless man sighed deeply. He seemed to weigh the decision to speak for a moment before finally answering. My name is Thomas. Thomas Archer. The name seemed familiar, though Mr. Daniels couldn't place it immediately. He searched his mind, trying to connect the dots. Archer. Archer. It was a name that carried a certain weight, but it was also a name that felt distant, like an echo from a forgotten past. You're not the original owner, are you? Emily asked, speaking up for the first time. Her voice was still hesitant, but it carried the urgency of someone who was trying to make sense of an impossible situation. Thomas shook his head slowly. No. The original owner was my great-grandfather, Edward Archer. He built this hotel in the early 1900s. It was a labor of love, a dream that he wanted to last for generations. But not just as a hotel. The land was meant to be a sanctuary, a place of protection. A place of history. Mr. Daniels frowned. But Edward Archer was. He was a visionary, Thomas interrupted. He didn't just see this place as a business venture. He saw it as something greater. Something more meaningful than the typical investments and money-making schemes. He saw the hotel as a cornerstone of a legacy, one that would endure long after he was gone. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but not quickly enough for Mr. Daniels to understand everything. The history he knew was being torn apart in front of his eyes, and it didn't make sense. Edward Archer? The founder of the hotel? He had heard the name before, but only in passing, like a distant historical figure who didn't quite fit into the modern story of the hotel. So, what happened? Mr. Daniels asked. How did your family lose this place? Thomas paused for a long moment, as though the answer to that question had been buried for years, and he was only now unearthing it. They sold it, he said simply, his voice tinged with bitterness. My great-grandfather didn't want to sell it. He fought against it. But the city was growing, and the pressure to expand and modernize became too great. People with money, people with power, they pushed him into a corner. They offered him a deal he couldn't refuse. They said they'd keep the integrity of the hotel intact. They said they'd honor the legacy. But they lied. They took it all, and they erased everything my family had built. Mr. Daniels stood there, stunned. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together, but the full picture was still out of focus. You're telling me, the original owners, your great-grandfather, they sold the hotel to the wrong people, and now you're here to take it back?" Thomas nodded, his expression growing more somber. "Yes. But it's more than that. My family's history, our land, it wasn't just about business. There were secrets here. Secrets that were buried. And now they're starting to resurface." A sense of dread began to fill the room. The air felt thick with tension, as though something was about to break open, something that none of them were ready for. The hotel, the land, the people who had once owned it, everything was tied to a story much darker than anyone had realized. "What kind of secrets?" Greg asked, his voice shaky. Thomas didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced over at the lobby's large windows, as though searching for something beyond the glass. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and steady. "Back in the early days, my great-grandfather had a partner. A man named Jonathan Cross. Cross was the one who convinced him to sell, the one who pushed him to make the deal with the outside investors. But there was something off about Cross. Something my great-grandfather never knew, until it was too late. Cross wasn't just a businessman. He was part of something much bigger. Something dangerous. And when my great-grandfather realized the truth, it was already too late." Mr. Daniels' breath caught in his throat. "What are you saying? Who was Jonathan Cross?" Thomas's eyes met his, and for the first time, Mr. Daniels saw something more than just sadness. There was fear in Thomas's gaze. Fear of something that had never gone away. Jonathan Cross was part of a secret society, a group that operated in the shadows, influencing decisions, controlling assets, and burying truths. My great-grandfather never knew what he was really dealing with. And now it's time to uncover the truth. The weight of the truth hung in the air, thick and oppressive, like a storm waiting to break. Mr. Daniels stood motionless, trying to process the flood of information Thomas had just revealed. Jonathan Cross. A secret society. A family legacy lost to the dark dealings of powerful men. It sounded like a story ripped straight from a conspiracy novel, but Thomas's eyes, dark and intense, told a different story. A story that wasn't fiction, but a reality far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. The quiet of the hotel lobby was broken only by the distant hum of traffic outside. Inside, the air felt charged, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. Something that none of them were prepared for. Greg broke the silence, his voice shaky but determined. "So, you're telling us that this secret society, they're the reason the hotel was sold? They controlled everything from the shadows?" Thomas nodded slowly. "Yes. Jonathan Cross was just a front. The real power lay with the people he answered to. A group of elites who had been manipulating events for decades. They didn't care about the hotel or my family. They cared about the land, the history, and the influence it would give them." Emily's eyes widened with disbelief. But why didn't anyone know about this? Why would something like this be hidden for so long? "Because they controlled the narrative," Thomas replied, his voice dark. "They made sure no one asked the right questions. They used money, power, and influence to bury everything about my family's history, the land, and the hotel. They erased the truth." Mr. Daniels felt a knot tighten in his chest. The pieces were slowly falling into place, but the full picture was still elusive, like a shadow that flitted just out of reach. The questions were piling up faster than answers could be given. Who were these elites? Why would they want control over a hotel? What did they want with the land? And most importantly, what did it all have to do with the homeless man standing before them, Thomas Archer? "Why now?" Mr. Daniels finally asked, his voice low. "Why come back now? After all these years?" Thomas's gaze shifted to the book in Mr. Daniels' hands. He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he seemed to be searching for the right words, as if the weight of his own past was bearing down on him too heavily to bear. "Because I can't let them erase everything my family built," Thomas said quietly. "I can't let them bury the truth any longer. I have to find out what happened to my great-grandfather's legacy. The truth is buried here, in this hotel. And I'll stop at nothing to uncover it." Mr. Daniels swallowed hard, the significance of Thomas's words sinking in. It wasn't just about reclaiming the hotel. It was about something far greater: the truth, the legacy, and the powerful forces that had worked tirelessly to bury it all. There was a dangerous undercurrent running through this story, one that none of them fully understood yet. Greg stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "But what's in this hotel? What's hidden here that's so important?" Thomas didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked past them, his gaze drifting to the far corner of the lobby, where the walls seemed to loom higher, casting long, shadowy stretches on the floor. It was as though he was looking at something that none of them could see. Something that lay just beyond the surface. "There are rooms," Thomas said finally. "Rooms that no one is supposed to know about. Rooms that have been hidden for years." "Hidden?" Emily asked, her voice trembling slightly. "What kind of rooms?" "Rooms with secrets," Thomas replied simply. "Rooms that hold the key to everything. My great-grandfather's journals, he wrote about them. The society knew about them, too. That's why they wanted the hotel. Not just for the land, but for what was hidden beneath it. What's buried under the foundation." The idea of hidden rooms inside such a grand hotel seemed impossible. The hotel was a symbol of luxury, opulence, and success. Its polished floors, grand chandeliers, and perfectly decorated rooms didn't lend themselves to the idea of hidden, secret spaces. But the conviction in Thomas's voice made it clear that this wasn't just another conspiracy theory, it was a real part of the hotel's history. Mr. Daniels felt a sudden rush of panic. "Wait, are you saying that there's something under this hotel? Something that no one knows about?" Thomas nodded. "Yes. My great-grandfather was the only one who knew. He left a map, a series of clues. But after the sale of the hotel, they made sure that no one could find it. They wanted to keep it buried forever." The atmosphere in the room grew heavier, like the very air was closing in on them. It wasn't just the mystery of the hotel's past now, it was something darker, more dangerous. If what Thomas was saying was true, they were standing in the middle of a place that had been built on secrets, lies, and hidden truths. "We have to find it," Thomas said, his voice intense. "We have to find the truth, no matter the cost." Emily hesitated. "But how do we even begin to look for something that's been hidden for so long? And what if these people, the ones behind the society, don't want anyone to find it?" Thomas's eyes flicked toward the door, as though he could sense something lurking just outside the lobby. "They don't know I'm here. Not yet. But they will. And when they do, they'll stop at nothing to keep the truth buried. But I have to find it. I owe it to my great-grandfather. I owe it to my family." Mr. Daniels' mind was spinning. He didn't know what to believe, but one thing was certain: there was a danger here, something lurking in the shadows that they hadn't fully seen yet. The hotel wasn't just a luxury building, it was a battlefield for something much larger, a fight for the past, the truth, and the power to control it. "We'll help you," Mr. Daniels said, the words leaving his mouth before he even had time to think them through. But as soon as he said them, he realized it was true. There was no turning back now. They were already entangled in something much bigger than themselves. Thomas looked at him, his expression softening for the first time. "You don't have to help me. This is my fight. But if you're willing to come with me, to uncover the truth, then we'll need to start looking. We'll need to start searching for the rooms that were hidden. And we'll need to find the map before they do." The gravity of the situation was becoming clearer by the second. The hotel was no longer just a place of business or luxury, it was a labyrinth of secrets, and they were about to dive headfirst into its depths. Emily stepped forward, her face set with determination. "We'll help you, Thomas. We'll find the truth together." Greg nodded, still looking uneasy but willing to follow. "If we're really going to do this, we need a plan." Thomas smiled faintly, though there was no joy in it. "We start by looking for the first clue. My great-grandfather's journals, they'll tell us where to go. And we need to get to the basement. That's where it all started. That's where the first secret is hidden." The basement. Mr. Daniels had never thought much about it. It was a place employees used to store supplies, cold and cramped, with a long, narrow hallway that led to maintenance rooms and storage closets. It was nothing special. Or so he thought. "Let's go," Thomas said. "We don't have much time. They'll be looking for me soon. We need to act fast." The small group made their way through the hotel, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the empty halls. It felt like they were walking through a forgotten world, a place that had been abandoned by everyone but them. As they descended into the basement, the air grew colder, heavier, as though the past itself had never really left. The basement door creaked open, and the darkness greeted them like an old friend. The smell of dust and stale air filled their lungs as they stepped inside, their flashlights cutting through the blackness. "Stay close," Thomas whispered, his voice barely audible. And with that, they began their search. A search that would uncover more than they ever expected. A search that would lead them to secrets so deep, so dangerous, that they would never be the same again. The basement of the hotel was colder than they had imagined. The air had a damp, musty smell that seemed to seep into their lungs with every breath. As Thomas led the way, his footsteps echoing on the concrete floor, Mr. Daniels couldn't help but feel a deep sense of unease. The walls, draped in layers of dust and cobwebs, seemed to close in on them, and the only light came from their flashlights, slicing through the darkness like fragile beams of hope. Emily walked beside Mr. Daniels, her face pale, her eyes darting around nervously. She had never been in this part of the hotel before. Like most of the guests and employees, she had never ventured beyond the luxury of the upper floors. But now, as they descended deeper into the heart of the building, the true weight of their situation began to sink in. They were in a place no one had set foot in for decades. And whatever secrets lay hidden here, they were about to uncover them. Greg, ever the skeptic, seemed more on edge than usual. His eyes were wide, scanning every corner of the basement as though expecting something, or someone, to leap out of the shadows. He glanced at Thomas, his expression a mixture of disbelief and fear. "You really think there's something down here?" Greg's voice trembled slightly, betraying his nerves. Thomas didn't turn around. His gaze remained fixed ahead as he continued to lead them down the narrow hallway. "I know there is. My great-grandfather left clues. They're here, hidden somewhere. But why didn't anyone find them before?" Emily asked, her voice tight with curiosity. "You're saying that this whole time, no one has thought to look here?" Thomas stopped abruptly, his foot scraping against the floor. He turned around, his face shadowed in the dim light. "They've been looking in the wrong places. They were too focused on the obvious, on the hotel itself. They never thought to look beneath it. But my great-grandfather knew they would come looking for his secrets. He made sure to hide them where only the right person could find them. The person who would know how to read the clues." Mr. Daniels took a deep breath, steeling himself for whatever was to come. "All right. So, where do we start looking?" Thomas pointed to the far end of the basement, where a heavy steel door stood, rusted with age. It looked like it had been forgotten, untouched for years. The door was locked, the mechanism old and worn, but it stood there, ominous and waiting. "That's it," Thomas said. "That's where we start." The group approached the door, their footsteps quiet in the stillness. As they reached it, Mr. Daniels noticed the strange symbols carved into the metal, barely visible beneath layers of dust. They looked like a mix of ancient runes and architectural designs, odd, foreign, and out of place. He ran his fingers over them, feeling a chill run up his spine as he did. "Do you see that?" he whispered. "Those symbols, they're not just random. They're part of the map," Thomas said, his voice barely audible. "My great-grandfather designed the symbols to match a pattern. The symbols are keys. They lead to the hidden rooms." "But what do they mean?" Emily asked, stepping closer to get a better look. "Are they part of some code?" Thomas nodded. "Yes. But not just any code. A code that was meant to be deciphered only by someone who knew the history of this place. The history that's been lost. The history that was erased." Mr. Daniels looked at the door again, taking in the details. The symbols were intricate, but something about them felt familiar, like they were calling to him from the past. He could almost hear his great-grandfather's voice in his head, warning him, guiding him. The weight of the moment pressed down on him. This was it. This was the beginning of the truth, the moment where everything would change. "We need to open it," Thomas said, his voice urgent. "If we don't, we'll never find what's hidden behind it." Greg stepped forward, his hand hovering over the rusted lock. "Can we even open this thing? It looks like it's been sealed shut for decades." "We can," Thomas replied. "The symbols are the key. I just need to figure out the pattern." With that, Thomas knelt down in front of the lock, tracing the symbols with his fingers. His brow furrowed in concentration as he examined them, his mind working through the puzzle. The air in the basement seemed to grow colder, the tension palpable. For a moment, it felt like the whole world had come to a standstill, as if the very fabric of time and space was holding its breath. Then, with a soft click, the lock gave way. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a darkened room beyond. The room was vast, the ceiling high, but it was filled with shadows, shadows that seemed to stretch and dance along the walls. Thomas stood up, his eyes gleaming with determination. "This is it," he said. "This is where the truth lies." They stepped through the door, their footsteps echoing on the stone floor. As they entered the room, Mr. Daniels felt a chill run down his spine. There was something deeply unsettling about this place, an energy that was almost oppressive, as though the very air had been holding onto its secrets for far too long. The room was lined with shelves that were stacked with old boxes, leather-bound books, and strange artifacts. It looked like a library, but unlike any library Mr. Daniels had ever seen. The dust was thick here, undisturbed by time. The air was still, and the silence was deafening. Thomas moved quickly, his eyes scanning the room with purpose. "It's here," he muttered to himself, his hands running along the shelves. "It has to be." Mr. Daniels glanced around, trying to make sense of the scene. There were old trunks and wooden crates in the far corners, and piles of what looked like papers scattered on the floor. But nothing seemed to stand out, nothing that would immediately reveal the truth they were looking for. Then, Thomas stopped. His eyes widened as he reached for a small, unmarked box resting on a shelf in the corner. He pulled it down carefully, as though handling something fragile, and placed it on the table in the center of the room. "This is it," Thomas said, his voice trembling. "This box contains everything. The final clue. The last piece of the puzzle." Mr. Daniels watched as Thomas carefully opened the box. Inside, there was a small, folded piece of parchment, old and yellowed with age. Thomas took it out gently, unfolding it with great care. The writing on the parchment was almost impossible to read. It was written in a flowing script, but the ink had faded with time, the words barely legible. Thomas squinted at it, his finger tracing the letters. "Here it is," he whispered. "The map. The final clue." The others crowded around him, trying to get a glimpse of the map. The lines were faint, but they were there, lines that curved and twisted across the page, forming a path. It was a map of the hotel, but not the hotel they knew. This map showed hidden rooms, passages beneath the foundation, and a series of symbols that seemed to correspond with the ones they had found on the door. "These are the rooms," Thomas said, his voice full of awe. "The rooms my great-grandfather built to protect the secrets. They're all here." Mr. Daniels stared at the map, trying to make sense of it. "What are we looking for? What's the next step?" Thomas looked up at him, his eyes dark with determination. "The final room is located beneath the main floor, under the grand staircase. It's the room where everything began. If we can get to it, we'll find the truth. We'll find what they've been hiding all these years." But before anyone could respond, a loud crash echoed from above. It sounded like something had fallen, something heavy. And then, a voice, shouting, urgent, and filled with menace. "They're here." The sound of the crash above them reverberated through the walls, the force of it shaking the dusty air in the basement. Everyone froze, their hearts pounding in unison. It wasn't just the noise that was unsettling, it was the voice that followed. The harsh, commanding voice echoed from above, muffled yet unmistakable. "They're here." The words were like a cold slap in the face. Mr. Daniels' pulse quickened, and his mind raced. The people Thomas had warned them about, the ones who had been hunting for the secrets buried beneath the hotel, had arrived. They were no longer dealing with just the mystery of the hotel's past. They were up against a dangerous force, a shadowy group that would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. Thomas's face tightened with resolve. "They've found us," he muttered. "We don't have much time." Emily's voice shook. "Who are they? What do they want?" Thomas turned to her, his expression hard. "They're the ones behind the sale of the hotel. They're the ones who've been erasing my family's legacy for years. They're the secret society. And they'll do whatever it takes to keep what's buried here hidden." Greg looked toward the door, his eyes wide with fear. "How did they find us so fast? What do we do now?" Thomas didn't hesitate. He grabbed the map from the table and shoved it into Mr. Daniels' hands. "We follow the map. We go to the final room. It's our only chance." The urgency in his voice left no room for argument. Without waiting for a response, Thomas turned and bolted toward the far side of the basement. He pushed open another door, this one smaller, unmarked, almost invisible against the stone walls. A cold draft rushed out from behind it as if it had been sealed for centuries. The others exchanged nervous glances before following him. The narrow corridor stretched out before them, leading deeper beneath the hotel's foundation. The walls were damp with moisture, and the air was thick with the musty scent of age and neglect. The light from their flashlights flickered, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move with them. "Stay close," Thomas urged, his voice a whisper. "We're almost there." The map in Mr. Daniels' hands showed a series of twisting pathways, each one leading to a different part of the hotel's subterranean labyrinth. The final room was marked with an X, a symbol that meant more than just the end of their journey. It was a place of unimaginable importance, a place that would either give them the answers they sought or swallow them whole. As they moved deeper into the bowels of the hotel, the sound of footsteps above them grew louder. They could hear muffled voices, shouting, commanding, and then a door slamming open. The intruders were getting closer. Greg, who had been walking behind Mr. Daniels and Emily, looked over his shoulder with growing panic. "We're running out of time. We have to hurry." Thomas didn't respond, his focus fixed on the path ahead. But the tension was palpable, and the further they went, the darker and colder it became. The walls seemed to close in on them, and the oppressive silence grew heavier with each step. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached the end of the hall. Before them stood an old wooden door, unlike anything they had seen in the hotel above. It was intricately carved with symbols and patterns, symbols that matched the ones from the basement door, the ones Thomas had deciphered earlier. This was it. The final door. Thomas stepped forward, his hand trembling slightly as he placed it on the handle. He hesitated for a moment, as if bracing himself for what lay beyond. Then, with a deep breath, he turned the knob. The door creaked open, revealing a small, dimly lit room. It was nothing like the grand, luxurious spaces above. The walls were lined with shelves, stacked high with old books and yellowing papers. In the center of the room was a large stone pedestal, and atop it, a dusty glass case. Inside the case was a single object, a small, ornate box. It was the kind of box that would be easy to overlook if you weren't searching for it. It seemed out of place in the room, its elegance stark against the worn surroundings. But there was no mistaking its significance. Thomas stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the box. "This is it," he said, his voice filled with awe. "This is what they've been hiding all these years." Mr. Daniels' heart raced as he followed Thomas into the room. "What is it? What's inside?" Thomas didn't answer immediately. Instead, he carefully approached the pedestal and reached out to lift the glass case. With a soft click, the lid of the case was removed, revealing the box in all its mysterious beauty. It was made of dark wood, with intricate carvings on every side. The patterns matched the symbols they had seen throughout the hotel, the same symbols that had led them here. "This box," Thomas said, his voice trembling, "holds the key to everything. It's my great-grandfather's final message. He knew they would come for it. He knew they would stop at nothing to keep it hidden." The box was locked, but unlike the door to the basement, this lock was far more intricate. It wasn't just a simple mechanism. It was a puzzle, a challenge that required more than brute force to open. "How do we open it?" Greg asked, his voice tight with frustration. Thomas ran his fingers over the carvings on the box, studying the patterns closely. "The symbols are the key. They match the ones from the map. The map wasn't just for the hotel, it was for this box. My great-grandfather made sure only someone who understood the history of this place could open it." Mr. Daniels watched as Thomas's fingers danced across the box, his mind working through the puzzle. For a moment, it felt like time itself was holding its breath, waiting for the moment when the truth would finally be revealed. Then, with a soft click, the box opened. Inside was a stack of papers, old, brittle, and yellowed with age. But more than that, there was something else. A photograph. A photograph of a man, young, clean-shaven, and dressed in a suit. His eyes, dark and intense, stared back at them from the photograph, as though he had been waiting for them to find him. "Who is this?" Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. Thomas's eyes widened as he recognized the man in the photo. "That's him. That's Jonathan Cross." Mr. Daniels felt a chill crawl up his spine. "But, how? You said Cross was just a front." Thomas nodded, his face pale. "He was. But not in the way I thought. Cross wasn't just a member of the society. He was the leader. He was the one pulling the strings all along. The truth hit them all like a tidal wave. Jonathan Cross, the man who had been the face of the hotel's sale, the man who had seemingly walked away from everything, he was the mastermind. He wasn't just a pawn in the game, he was the one who had orchestrated everything. And he was still out there, somewhere, waiting to protect his secrets at all costs. But the most shocking revelation was still to come. Thomas pulled out a final piece of paper from the box, an old, faded letter. He held it up for everyone to see. The letter was addressed to him, to Thomas Archer. And the words inside were unlike anything he had ever imagined. "You have no idea what you've uncovered," the letter read. "You've followed the clues well, but you've only scratched the surface. The truth is much darker than you can imagine. The hotel is not just a building, it's a key. A key to a power beyond your understanding. The real question is, will you unlock it, or will you leave it buried forever?" As Thomas read those words aloud, the room seemed to grow colder still. The shadows in the corners of the room stretched and twisted, as though the very walls were alive, watching, waiting. Mr. Daniels looked at Thomas, his heart racing. What does this mean? What power is he talking about? Thomas's eyes flickered with a mixture of fear and resolve. I don't know. But I'm going to find out. Suddenly, a noise from above interrupted them. It was loud, too loud. Footsteps, running, and then a shout. A voice they all recognized. We know you're down there. Come out now. The voice was familiar, too familiar. It was Jonathan Cross. He had been waiting for them all along. And now, the final confrontation was upon them.